Straight. Morning everybody. Well, what a great pleasure to be here today, and how amazing to be involved with this Yorkshire Mafia conference. There's such an energy about this place, a real energy about what's going on, and it proves that despite all of the doom and gloom that's surrounding us in the press and in the sort of rest of the country, here in Yorkshire we really do have something special, so remember that. The business I founded and I still run is called Straight Plc, and it's a group of companies concerned with environmental products and services. We're approaching our 20th anniversary, in fact this May, but the story starts sometime before the 20 years. And I'd like to explain this morning how an idea, a eureka moment if you like, was built into the £30 million brand that Straight Plc is today. And I hope along the way to give a few insights and tips which might help you in what you're doing. I call these the 10 Commandments. They're not these 10 Commandments, there are another 10, but there are 10 of them still. So we start with very humble beginnings, the discovery of recycling, or more accurately, the lack of recycling. And then I explain how I got into the bin business, became the UK market leader, how I floated the business on the stock market, and about that experience of being a quoted company. And then finally I'd like, if we've got time, just to look a bit at the brand and how the brand's evolved over the last 20 years. Here's a little bit about the business. We supply containers for source separated waste. People do call them bins, and we sell them to councils, we sell them to the waste management industry. We also supply environmental products like compost bins and water butts. We work in partnership with councils, we work in partnership with water companies. When you get your water bill from Yorkshire Water and there's an offer of a discounted water butt, that's generally us that provide the product. Water butts are a very hot topic at the moment because of the drought. The last drought in 2006 nearly destroyed us, but we're actually pretty well equipped now. We're making water butts like shelling peas, and people are buying them like there's no tomorrow. So these are the 2010 numbers. The reason I haven't put the 2011 numbers up is because I haven't released them to the market yet. What we have told the market is the 2011 numbers are not that great, but this year is looking a whole lot better, I'm pleased to say. Now here are some of the products we supply. This is a curbside collection box used in some parts of Yorkshire. It's for collecting dry, recyclable material from the doorstep. Food waste caddies. Food waste is rapidly growing now. Food waste collections happening in Leeds, in Rothwell, in some other parts of Yorkshire. And the food waste turns into compost, and energy can be generated at the same time. We do wheel bins. We also do something quite innovative called the wheel bin inner caddy, which is the little blue container you can see in there. When councils are collecting paper and glass, they need to keep them apart. It's ideal if they're kept apart, and this allows a collection like that to happen without having another container. Metal wheel bins, you see these at the back of businesses, of supermarkets, and also the kind of container for recycling in the workplace. This is something for collecting batteries. We do specialist containers for a range of hazardous wastes. Home compost bins I mentioned earlier, and water butts. And we also do this kind of water butt. It's called a butt butt. It was designed by Wayne Hemingway, and it was an absolute flop. Well, I think it's fair to say that from a young age I had an interest in business. I was educated at this Gothic pile, and I hated it. But this is where the story begins. And we had a meeting, all of us assembled at about 16 years old, about what we'd like to do for our A-levels. And they said they were going to do this business studies course. Was anybody interested? Well, I'd had 8 years of being absolutely disinterested in everything that school had taught me. And suddenly, here was something that actually I was interested in. So I was right at the front of the queue, and 9 of us duly started the course. Gary Verity, who's here running some of the panels, was also on that course. And I had this idea. You see, we had this hole in the wall where at break time you could go and buy chocolates and sweets and iced buns. And I thought it would be a great idea if the 9 of us in this business studies group could manage this enterprise. So I persuaded the powers that be to let us do it. And they said, well, okay, you can manage it, but we're not going to tell you any of the financials because that's a bit sensitive. So we had this situation where this business was only open for a couple of hours a day, and yet the 1,000 boys in the school were there all day. So I had this disruptive idea to put vending machines all over Leeds Grammar School. And what was even more interesting was that food manufacturers were actually prepared to give us the vending machines for nothing, and they had special sizes of product that only fitted the vending machine. So while I was at Leeds Grammar School, I made them a fortune, but because they wouldn't tell me the financials, I to this day don't know how successful we were or weren't. My first business venture was quite short-lived. As well as an interest in business, I've got a musical talent. And I've worked a bit as a pub pianist, in fact, in the early years, and I did a lot of amateur theatre. And it was while I was playing the part of Mickey in Blood Brothers at the Leeds Civic Theatre that I met a fellow who was marketing director of a supermarket called Hillard's. Some of you might remember it. Now, this is Hillard's in Heckmondwike in 1977. Now, Heckmondwike has a place in my heart because my late grandfather had a tailoring shop in Heckmondwike, and he worked there all of his years. It was his own business, it was a small business, and when he retired, that business was worth nothing. And it struck me that this was very wrong and there was a great injustice, and that if I wanted to create a business, actually it needed to have some tangible value. So, coming back to the man from Hillard's, he said, look, you've got these two interests, you've got these two talents, so what could we do? And we had this idea that I would set up a business to produce advertising jingles. And I presented to Hillard's advertising agency. I had all these great ideas for radio campaigns, and a week after this presentation, Tesco bought Hillard's and the whole thing was mothballed. So I was in a bit of a dilemma because I'd set up a business, I had all the framework ready, I had to come up with some ideas and fast. So I decided to sell books by post. Well, well, what could have been? There was no internet in those days, unfortunately, and it was very, very slow. I was introduced to the sales director of a fitted bedroom company. They had this evening call centre, and they were looking for somebody to run it. Basically, it was making appointments for people to go out and sell bedrooms. And I liked this because I could earn a lot of money in the evenings, and that would leave me free during the day to pursue my other interests. But when I got there, I found that it was in a terrible state. People would ring and say, we'd like your catalogue, and then a week later the catalogue might arrive, and a week after that somebody might just be bothered to ring, and by then the customer had bought a bedroom from somewhere else. So I ended up working 60, 70, 80 hours a week in this place, fixing the mess, and taking charge of the whole direct response operation. And I got it to the point where they'd ring in, the brochure would be on the doormat the next morning, that night we'd ring them up and we'd sell them a bedroom. And I had it so finely tuned that I knew exactly how much it was worth every time the phone rang. And so we were obviously very careful about who answered those phone calls. So what I learned in this operation was a lot about sales and marketing, a lot about direct marketing, and a lot of ideas about how you really shouldn't run a business. And I learned a very important lesson there because, it was a chaotic environment. But there was a fellow who was the sales director, really one of my very early mentors. And he was able to cut through all this chaos and set clear goals. We knew exactly what we were doing. It didn't really matter what was happening around us. our sort of small team knew exactly what we were doing. And the other thing is, we were able to communicate those clearly and effectively. They were communicated to us, and we were able to communicate them to each other. Now, as is often the case, people say one thing and do another, and the vast commissions I was promised for improving matters for this bedroom company did not arrive, so I left. And so on to my third commandment, which is tell the truth, because you're only going to get away with lying once. I then spent 6 months selling menswear. This was the only 6 months I'd ever spent as an employee until I worked for my own business. I worked for a Mr. Glynn. Here is one of his brands, King Glynn. Did this fellow have delusions of grandeur? Probably. You could argue it was a pretty difficult thing to sell British-made clothes in the late 1980s, but it taught me more lessons. It taught me about how wasteful the time travelling as a salesperson is. And, of course, the main problem with being employed is you can get sacked, and I was. So, it's the late 1980s. I know a lot about sales and marketing. I've got a bit of money in the bank. But I'm idealistic. I don't just want to earn a living. I want to give something back. I want to do something positive. So I spent my time looking at what there was available. I looked at charities. I looked at the social economy. It seemed like really to take a job in those sectors you needed to have a trust fund, otherwise you couldn't afford to live. But what else was going on in the 1980s, the late 1980s, was an environmental agenda. Now we might think that this is new and is recent, but it isn't. In the late 1980s there was a big green agenda coming. And I was reading a book about green issues, and I read something which set my direction for the next 25 years. And this is what I read. We pay to bury our waste in holes in the ground, and yet the material we bury has a value, so we pay for it twice. I read it again. I couldn't believe that such an obvious opportunity was staring me in the face. I felt if I could sort this mess out, not only would I make a great social contribution, but I might actually make some money at the same time. But in 1988, there was no recycling industry. There was no internet. There was something called the reference library, where you had to go and find things out. There were one or two obscure publications, like Materials Recycling Week, and if you had to telephone somebody, it was with a dial, and it was slow. I started talking to anybody and everybody I could think of who might be able to help. And so on to the fourth commandment, which is never, never, never give up. If you've got a good idea, if you know in your mind and your heart that something's right, you've got to stick with it. This was an opportunity that was too good to leave. And I discovered in Leeds there was this little organisation called Save, Waste and Prosper, and I did. So they said, send in your CV and we'll think about it. Actually, I persuaded them to interview me. I persuaded them to give me a job. One slight catch with this job, there was no salary. But listen, I had nothing better to do, and I recognised that this was a way to learn the industry, to gain connections, but to get paid, I'd have to make myself indispensable pretty quickly. So, I turned up to the office, my first day at work, suit, collar, tie, and I found 5 people huddled around a second-hand IBM computer, all wearing second-hand knitwear. Actually, it was worse than that. They were second-hand tank tops. But I began to look after some recycling programs, bottle bank sites, and I was also responsible for their bookkeeping and their cash flow forecasting. So 2 weeks later, they started paying me, because if I'd have gone, the business would have gone. And I learned, and I networked, and I got known, and for some reason, people didn't forget me.